What began as an intimate family dinner behind palace doors ended with a moment so shocking that it sent ripples through the monarchy. A young princess making a choice that could alter the royal balance forever. The evening had been carefully crafted as a symbol of unity, a moment where the fractures of the royal household could be glossed over with the appearance of calm. The table was grand yet intimate, lined with familiar faces meant to remind the public of harmony. But beneath the polished silver and candlelight was a tension so thick that no toast could dissolve it. Windsor Castle, long a fortress of tradition, was about to witness an act of defiance that would not be easily forgotten. Camilla entered the evening with the quiet confidence of a queen consort. She expected deference, the nods, the courtesies that had been drilled into every royal gathering. For her, this dinner was not just about family. It was about asserting her role, stamping her authority into the next generation. She had endured years of scrutiny, whispers, and comparisons, but tonight was her moment to be seen as untouchable. And then, it happened. The youngest voices at the table were asked, as tradition dictated, to perform the curtsy. It was routine, ceremonial, and symbolic. But when Charlotte's name was called, what followed was not submission. It was silence. The little princess, seated upright and unflinching, simply stayed still. The pause was deafening. Every fork, every glass, every breath seemed frozen in midair. The expectation that she would rise and bow dissolved before the eyes of those watching. Her refusal was not loud, yet it thundered louder than any proclamation. The queen consort, for a brief moment, seemed visibly unsettled, her composure cracking in the faintest of tremors. The table shifted in discomfort, the weight of the moment pressing down with force. William's eyes darted immediately to Catherine, his expression tight, as if searching for answers in his wife's calm exterior. Catherine remained composed, her gaze steady, offering no correction and no command to her daughter. It was a mother's silence that spoke volumes, a choice not to intervene. And then, Anne, seated with her habitual stoicism, watched with a faintly hidden look that suggested recognition, even approval. For Anne, this was not rebellion without meaning. It was defiance, born from something deeper, something long understood. The room moved forward cautiously after that, words flowing again, dishes passed around, laughter forced into the air. But no one forgot what had just taken place. Behind every smile lingered the ghost of that refusal. Camilla, though still outwardly regal, seemed shaken, her hands tightening on her glass, her eyes flickering toward Charlotte with unease. The atmosphere never fully recovered, and the dinner became less about family and more about survival, everyone holding their breath for what might happen next. But what seemed like a child's act of defiance was far more than it was the spark that lit up long-hidden resentments within the royal family. Why would a child dare to break one of the oldest traditions of the monarchy? Charlotte's refusal wasn't impulsive. It carried a weight of history, whispers, and lessons passed down in secrecy. To the outside world, it may have looked like a moment of childish stubbornness, a fleeting hesitation before performing a duty she had been taught since birth. But beneath that silence was the shadow of stories told in hushed tones, of a grandmother she never met, but whose spirit had been woven into her understanding of the monarchy. Charlotte, more than any of her siblings, has been said to ask questions about the past, about why her family is loved by some and resented by others. From an early age, she learned the name Diana not as a figure in history books, but as a constant presence in her father's memory. That legacy of defiance, of challenging the unforgiving rules of the crown, lived quietly within her. It was Catherine who gave shape to that spirit, though never directly, never with open rebellion. Instead, she planted small seeds, teaching Charlotte that respect must be earned, not demanded, that a smile without sincerity is worthless, and that bowing to someone you do not believe in is a hollow act. These were not lessons drawn from textbooks of royal protocol, but from the struggles Catherine herself endured, navigating the scrutiny of the crown, the whispers of comparison, and the coldness that sometimes lurked within palace walls. To Charlotte, her mother was not simply a queen in waiting. She was a symbol of quiet strength, a woman who commanded respect, not because of her title, but because of her character. And when the moment came to curtsy before Camilla, Charlotte's instinct was not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was loyalty to those values her mother had carefully instilled. Charlotte's personality had always been strong-willed, fiercely independent, and unafraid to speak her mind. Even at her young age, she carried herself with an authority that surprised those around her. Where George was cautious and diplomatic, Charlotte was sharp, fiery, and unwilling to mask her emotions. This strength, when combined with the knowledge she had absorbed, created a perfect storm. To her, the act of curtsying was not just a tradition. It was an act of submission, a bow to someone she instinctively sensed had not earned her trust. And in that single refusal, she unknowingly mirrored Diana's courage. The same refusal to conform, the same audacity to break protocol, the same fearlessness that had both inspired millions and shaken the monarchy to its core. Camilla's history with William and Catherine was no secret in the household, even if delicately veiled in front of the children. Yet, in a palace where every hallway echoes with whispers, nothing stays hidden for long. Charlotte had overheard fragments of conversations, half-finished remarks, and stray comments exchanged by staff who forgot the little princess was listening. Children may not grasp the full meaning of such words, but they feel the tension. They recognize the unspoken emotions, the way names are said, the silence that follows. Charlotte understood enough to know that Camilla was a figure of division, not unity, and that realization, however childlike in its simplicity, guided her choice at the table. Her decision was not an accident. It was not the whim of a child too tired or distracted to follow tradition. It was instinct sharpened by lessons, whispers, and intuition far beyond her years. The refusal to curtsy became more than a symbolic pause. It was a deliberate act, whether Charlotte herself fully realized it or not. She had carried the weight of history into that moment, the echoes of Diana's defiance, the strength of her mother's quiet guidance, and her own innate resolve. And when she chose not to bow, it was as if the past and present collided, sending tremors through the palace corridors. And as the dinner carried on in tense silence, it became clear Charlotte's gesture wasn't just about her. It was about the legacy she was already carrying. For Camilla, it wasn't merely a child's refusal. It was a public humiliation in private, cutting deeper than any headline or scandal she had ever faced. She had fought for decades to reach the position she now occupied, clawing her way through the storm of public outrage, media attacks, and the ghostly comparisons to Diana that never ceased. But in that instant, when Charlotte's defiance cast a shadow across the table, it all seemed to crumble. Her face fell, her grip on the glass in her hand betraying the slightest tremor. Though the room remained quiet, the humiliation was deafening, echoing in her mind louder than any chorus of critics outside the palace walls. In that moment, the specter of Diana returned with brutal clarity. It was not the words of the press or the whispers of the people. It was the haunting reminder that she had never fully escaped the late princess's shadow. Diana had captured the love of the nation in ways Camilla never could, and Charlotte's silent refusal felt like a rebuke, not just of the queen consort's authority, but of everything she represented. For Camilla, it was as though the past had returned in the form of the next generation, a reminder that no matter the crown on her head, Diana's presence lingered in every glance, every comparison, and now, every act of defiance. Her entire journey had been one of struggle for legitimacy. Years of being tolerated rather than embraced, fighting to transform scorn into reluctant acceptance. But this one moment, this simple refusal, seemed to undo it all. The respect she had spent years forcing into existence cracked in an instant, not under the weight of scandal, but under the gaze of a child who would not bow. For Camilla, it was a wound that cut deeper than criticism, because it was uncalculated, unfiltered, and therefore brutally honest. Inside her, rage churned like a storm. It demanded to be unleashed, to call out the disrespect, to reclaim authority. But she knew the palace rules too well. Rage could not be shown, weakness could not be admitted, and every expression was a weapon to be dissected later by those who already doubted her place. So she forced composure, arranging her face into something resembling calm. Yet, beneath that mask, humiliation burned, poisoning the remainder of the evening. She sat straighter, held her glass tighter, and pretended not to notice that every eye in the room had already registered her defeat. Charles, seated nearby, was paralyzed in helpless silence. The king, who should have restored order, did nothing. His gaze remained low, his shoulders slumped, as though he too recognized the fragility of the moment. To defend his wife would have meant confronting his son and granddaughter, and in that silence, he revealed his own weakness. His failure to intervene only deepened Camilla's humiliation. Even within her marriage, she stood exposed, her authority reduced to a fragile illusion, shattered by the very family she was meant to rule beside. The staff, trained to notice everything and speak of nothing, exchanged discreet glances. Later, behind closed doors, they whispered that the queen consort looked broken, not angry, not offended. Broken. For those who had served long enough to see her battles, they knew this was a deeper wound than any newspaper headline could deliver. She had been embarrassed by the very bloodline that secured her crown, humiliated in a way no public scandal ever could. And though the dinner carried on, though dishes were served and conversations forced back into motion, the truth could not be hidden. Camilla had been wounded in the heart of her reign, but if Camilla thought this was a passing embarrassment, she was wrong. The fallout was only just beginning. William, usually measured and composed, found himself torn between protecting his daughter and honoring the crown. But his silence carried its own thunder. In that tense moment at the dinner table, all eyes instinctively turned to him, the future king, the man who bore the weight of both tradition and the legacy of rebellion passed down from his mother. His daughter had broken centuries of protocol, and the unspoken expectation was clear. William must step in, correct her, restore the balance, and reaffirm the authority of the queen consort. But he didn't. He sat there, jaw tight, eyes fixed, allowing the silence to stretch, refusing to lend his voice to Camilla's wounded pride. In that silence, he made a choice, one that spoke louder than any words ever could. The protective instincts of a father surged within him. Charlotte was not just another child at the royal table. She was his daughter, his blood, and through her, he saw echoes of Diana's unyielding spirit. William had promised himself long ago that his children would not suffer the same fate as his mother, crushed beneath the weight of tradition that demanded obedience at all costs. In Charlotte's defiance, he saw courage, and though it placed him in direct opposition to the very monarchy he was destined to lead, he could not bring himself to reprimand her. He let the silence stand as his shield for her, protecting her from the storm he knew was building around the table. Yet beneath that fatherly instinct was another truth. His disdain for Camilla, long buried under the demands of duty, resurfaced with a vengeance. William had tolerated her presence for the sake of appearances, but the scars of the past never truly healed. Diana's memory had been dishonored too many times, and to William, Camilla's role in the monarchy remained an open wound. The sight of his daughter refusing to curtsy didn't embarrass him. It validated the feelings he had carried for decades. It was as if Charlotte had voiced his own quiet rebellion, saying what he himself could not. And in that instant, his silence became an act of resistance, one he could never admit aloud, but one that pulsed with hidden fury. Charles, however, expected something very different. He looked to his son, waiting for him to bridge the gap, to restore order with firm authority. But William did nothing. His refusal to intervene struck Charles with a force equal to Charlotte's refusal to curtsy. The king had counted on his son's loyalty, on his role as the guardian of tradition, but instead, he was met with passive defiance. That silence, too heavy to ignore, carved a line between father and son, one that had been drawn many times before, but now seemed sharper, more final. It was Anne who recognized it first, the unspoken alliance that passed between William and herself. Both of them had long carried skepticism about Camilla's place in the monarchy. Both had endured the endless comparisons to Diana and had seen firsthand the cracks that Camilla's presence created in the foundation of the crown. When Anne caught William's eye across the table, it was a silent acknowledgement that Charlotte's rebellion had found supporters far older and wiser than she could know. And together, they let the silence hold, as though daring Camilla to interpret its meaning. The symbolism of it all was impossible to ignore. A father choosing to let his daughter resist. A man destined to be king, refusing to enforce tradition. It was as if William himself was granting Charlotte permission to be bold, to challenge authority, to inherit not just the monarchy's weight, but Diana's fire. And though the world outside the castle had not yet heard of what happened that night, William knew it would not remain contained for long. The monarchy thrives on secrecy, but it is undone by the smallest cracks, and his silence has just widened one. The growing sense lingered heavily in the room that William was allowing history to repeat. He, too, had watched a woman defy the crown and pay the price. Now his daughter stood on the same path, and instead of stopping her, he was quietly walking beside her. It was not the act of a careless father. It was the decision of a man who understood that some battles must be fought, even at the dinner table, even against the throne itself. And yet, while William's silence spoke volumes, It was Catherine's subtle actions that revealed a deeper truth about what really fueled Charlotte's defiance. Behind every royal child stands a guiding hand, and for Charlotte, that hand has always been her mother's, shaping her with quiet strength. Catherine has long understood that raising a daughter within the gilded cage of the monarchy requires more than just teaching manners and protocol. It requires instilling resilience, wisdom, and the ability to stand firm when silence would be easier. For years, she has been quietly preparing Charlotte for moments just like this one. Moments where respect and obedience are tested, where loyalty to tradition clashes with loyalty to truth. And when Charlotte refused to curtsy, Catherine's influence was unmistakable. Though spoken only in the quiet language of glances and silence, Catherine had taught her children from an early age that respect cannot be commanded by titles alone. It must be earned, proven through action, and sustained by character. This was not an open rebellion against the institution, but a lesson rooted in her own experience, knowing what it meant to be scrutinized, to be forced to submit to expectations that often felt hollow. She had lived it, endured it, and emerged with the belief that her children should never bow out of fear or obligation. Respect must be earned, not demanded, a phrase Charlotte had heard many times, absorbed not as defiance against the monarchy, but as a compass to guide her through the tangled web of palace life. It was Catherine's veiled disapproval of Camilla, never openly declared but always lingering, that had slowly seeped into Charlotte's understanding. A mother's emotions, no matter how restrained, are never invisible to a daughter. Charlotte had seen the way Catherine's expression tightened when Camilla entered the room, how her voice grew measured whenever her name was mentioned. Though Catherine remained outwardly courteous, her restraint revealed volumes, and Charlotte, with her sharp instincts, knew what was unspoken. That knowledge became her armor, convincing her that withholding the curtsy was not only permissible, but justified. During the dinner, while the atmosphere spiraled into silence, Catherine remained serene, her composure unbroken. She did not rush to correct her daughter. She did not shift uncomfortably or apologize to Camilla. Instead, she sat with quiet authority, the very picture of calm amidst the storm. Her silence became a shield, not just for Charlotte, but for herself, a statement that she would not betray her child's instinct by forcing her to bow. It was a decision as deliberate as Charlotte's refusal, and one that left Camilla with no choice but to recognize that this was not the mistake of a child, but the deliberate stance of a family. The unspoken look exchanged between mother and daughter that evening said everything words could not. Charlotte, steady in her refusal, glanced toward Catherine, seeking reassurance. Catherine's calm, almost imperceptible nod was enough to confirm that her daughter had not acted alone. The bond between them was unmistakable, a silent alliance against a figure neither of them fully embraced. And in that moment, Camilla realized the bitter truth. This was not simply a child's instinct, but the product of Catherine's careful, quiet shaping. The realization pierced her deeper than the act itself. Camilla understood that she was not fighting the rebellion of a child, she was fighting the influence of Catherine, a woman who carried herself with dignity and had captured the respect Camilla had chased her entire life. To see that dignity reflected in Charlotte's actions left no doubt that her humiliation was crafted not just by a child's defiance, but by a mother's steady hand. But it wasn't just a mother's influence. Charlotte's act carried the weight of another figure. One no longer alive, but ever present in the palace's shadow. It was as though the spirit of Diana herself lingered in that room, guiding Charlotte's every move, a reminder that the crown could never silence the people's princess. From the moment Charlotte refused to bow, there was an almost ghostly familiarity in her defiance, a flash of resistance that carried the same energy Diana had embodied in life. The determination in her silence was not just that of a child, it echoed the strength of a woman who had once dared to confront the monarchy's cold traditions with warmth, humanity, and courage. The resemblance was more than symbolic. It was as though Charlotte's gesture was written in Diana's hand, carried forward through time into the next generation. William had made sure his children knew who their grandmother was, not just the public figure idolized across the world, but the woman who loved fiercely and suffered deeply within palace walls. Around them, Diana was not a myth. She was a mother whose memory lived in stories William told when the cameras weren't watching. He would speak of her laughter, her bravery, her ability to comfort strangers, and yet stand boldly against the institution when it threatened her spirit. Charlotte, sharp and perceptive, absorbed every word. And in her refusal, she wasn't just rejecting Camilla, She was protecting the memory of the grandmother she never met, honoring a woman whose truth had been buried beneath a royal ceremony. That absence was painfully clear in Camilla's rise. Diana's face had once graced every headline, her presence filling the world's stage. Yet in the years since, Camilla's coronation had unfolded under a cloud of comparison, as though the throne she claimed had been built on the erasure of the one woman who could never be erased. That symbolic absence, the seat Diana never sat upon, the crown she never wore haunted every step of Camilla's reign, and Charlotte's refusal to curtsy dragged that ghost into the present. It was not simply disrespect, it was a silent reminder that the people's princess had not been forgotten, and her influence lived on in the very bloodline Camilla longed to control. The public memory has never forgiven, never softened, never forgotten Diana. To this day, she is remembered with tears and applause, her image gracing posters, documentaries, and the whispered admiration of millions. Camilla, in contrast, still struggles for acceptance, her role forever contested. That night at Windsor, the balance tipped once more. Charlotte's act became a living symbol of the divide between two legacies, Diana's eternal flame and Camilla's fragile crown. It was a comparison that cut deeper than scandal, one that Camilla could neither fight nor escape. Anne, who had known Diana well, recognized the energy immediately. She sat in silence, but her thoughts spoke loudly. In Charlotte, she saw the same spark she had once admired in her sister-in-law, the refusal to be diminished, the unwillingness to bow simply for show. Anne's knowing look across the table was not just recognition, it was approval, a quiet acknowledgement that the same fire which once unsettled the monarchy now burned in the young princess. Even the staff, discreet and disciplined, whispered of it afterward. "It felt like Diana was there," one admitted, describing the chill that fell over the room as Charlotte stood firm. It was not something that could be explained, but it could not be denied. The dinner had been meant to showcase unity, but it had instead resurrected the one figure who could still divide the crown from within. Diana's presence, unseen yet undeniable, had once again disrupted the fragile balance of the monarchy. If Diana's presence haunted Camilla that night, the next morning brought a new storm, because rumors of Charlotte's refusal could not be contained. No moment in the palace remains hidden for long, and soon whispers of Charlotte's defiance leaked beyond Windsor's walls, igniting a firestorm. What had begun as a dinner intended to project unity transformed overnight into a scandal that threatened to destabilize the monarchy's fragile public image. The corridors of Windsor had barely cooled from the tension when word slipped out, carried by a staff member whose quiet account reached ears eager for controversy. In the shadows of palace life, secrets do not stay buried. They move swiftly, whispering first in confidence, then repeated with urgency, until they find their way to those who can turn silence into spectacle. By dawn, the story was everywhere. Headlines erupted with phrases like "Charlotte's refusal" and "a child's defiance at the royal table." The media pounced with unrelenting fervor, spinning the tale of a young princess who dared to challenge a queen consort in private. What could have been dismissed as a minor breach of etiquette became a national talking point, amplified by years of unresolved tensions between Camilla and the memory of Diana. The story carried all the ingredients of scandal: innocence versus authority, history repeating itself, and a monarchy once again shaken by the boldness of a woman tied to Diana's bloodline. The public's reaction was swift and decisive. Charlotte, though just a child, was hailed as a heroine. Her refusal to curtsy was painted not as disrespect, but as instinctive truth. Across households and online platforms, the narrative emerged that this act symbolized the voice of Diana's legacy rising again. People who had long harbored doubts about Camilla's place on the throne saw Charlotte's gesture as confirmation of what they already believed, that acceptance could not be forced, and reverence could not be demanded. What the palace feared most had come to pass. The child had become the mirror of public opinion, and that opinion was not in Camilla's favor. Camilla, already shaken from the private humiliation, now faced the far harsher judgment of the world outside. The headlines painted her as fragile, unwanted, and humiliated by the very family she sought to unify. Every article seemed to underline her vulnerability, her contested status, and her inability to inspire loyalty, even from within. The comparison to Diana, unspoken but undeniable, weighed heavily. To the public, Diana remained untouchable, while Camilla seemed once again diminished. The story was not merely about Charlotte refusing a curtsy, it became a referendum on Camilla's reign, a reminder of wounds that had never healed. William and Catherine, however, remained silent. Their refusal to issue a statement, to correct the record, or scold their daughter publicly, only added fuel to the speculation. The silence was deafening, and it was interpreted as complicity, even quiet approval. Every day, they withheld their words. The story grew larger, the symbolism clearer. William's protective stance and Catherine's calm silence became part of the narrative, reinforcing the belief that this was more than a child's rebellion. It was a family statement, an unspoken rejection of Camilla's authority. The monarchy's public relations machine scrambled to contain the damage. Drafted statements were considered and discarded. Leaks were denied, though none convincingly. Efforts to frame the incident as a misunderstanding fell flat, as the public appetite for drama had already outpaced any attempt at spin. Behind the palace gates, panic set in. What had once been confined to whispers over a private dinner was now a storm splashed across every headline, threatening to erode what little harmony the institution still claimed to possess. But while the world speculated, the palace doors once again closed, and inside, the confrontation everyone feared finally erupted. In a tense, private meeting days later, voices rose, tears fell, and the monarchy's deepest fractures split open. The scandal had grown too loud to ignore, and behind closed doors, the family gathered not to celebrate tradition, but to confront the betrayal that had shaken their carefully crafted image. The walls of the palace had absorbed decades of whispered disputes, but this was no hushed conversation. It was an eruption. Camilla entered already burning with resentment, her composure brittle, her pride scarred by the humiliation that had followed her across headlines. She wasted no time in directing her fury where she believed it belonged. Turning to Catherine, her voice laced with venom, she spat the accusation. "You've poisoned her against me." Catherine, however, did not flinch. With the calmness that had become her hallmark, she met Camilla's rage, with words sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Children see the truth," she said evenly, her tone steady, her eyes unyielding. "No one needs to poison them." Those words hung in the air like a thunderclap, leaving the room stunned. They were not merely a defense of Charlotte, they were a direct indictment of Camilla's place in the monarchy. Catherine's refusal to retreat, her refusal to apologize, revealed not just her strength as a mother, but her quiet power as the woman the public already viewed as the future queen. Charles, visibly shaken, tried to intervene. His voice cracked as he pleaded for unity, urging them to remember the bigger picture, the duty they owed to the crown. Yet, his words fell flat. The room had no appetite for reconciliation. He begged for them to lower their voices, to think of the damage already done, but no one listened. His authority, fragile at the best of times, was overshadowed by the weight of the conflict between the women who defined his reign. The wife who wore the crown, and the daughter-in-law who carried the people's loyalty. For William, there was no hesitation. The time for silence had passed, and he stepped firmly to his wife's side. His voice carried not the neutrality of a prince, but the conviction of a man determined to protect his family. He defended Catherine's words, declaring that Charlotte's actions were her own, and that no child should be forced into gestures of respect that were not felt in their heart. His open siding with Catherine was more than a personal stance. It was a public signal of where his loyalty lay, and it left Camilla trembling with fury. Anne, ever pragmatic, broke her silence to deliver the final blow. She reminded them all that Charlotte had only acted on what many within the family already felt, but dared not say. Her defense of the young princess was as fierce as it was unwavering. "She is her father's daughter," Anne declared, "and her grandmother's legacy lives through her." The words struck Camilla with brutal precision, reminding her that Diana's presence still lingered, still haunted, and still undermined her grasp on legitimacy. Unable to bear the weight of the confrontation, Camilla finally stormed out, her voice breaking as she vowed never again to be humiliated by William's family. The slam of the door echoed like a verdict, one that underscored the divisions no amount of royal ceremony could conceal. And in that silence that followed her exit, everyone in the room understood the truth. This was no longer about a child's refusal, but about the future of the monarchy itself. But even as the dust settled, one thing was clear. The monarchy would never be the same, because Charlotte's act had set a dangerous precedent. Charlotte's refusal was more than a family dispute. It was a glimpse into the monarchy's uncertain future, a future where loyalty would be questioned and tradition defied. In a single act of silence, she had transformed into the unintentional face of a new generation, one that valued honesty over ritual and courage over conformity. The public, ever watchful, quickly embraced her as a symbol of bravery, a child who dared to say with her actions what many had long whispered about the crown. While Charlotte's defiance drew admiration, it left Camilla increasingly isolated, her grip on acceptance weakening with every echo of Diana's shadow that Charlotte seemed to revive. For William and Catherine, however, the moment solidified their position. Their image as protectors of truth and guardians of Diana's legacy shone brighter than ever, their silence turning into strength in the eyes of the nation. The symbolism was undeniable. Through Charlotte, Diana's spirit still walked the halls of the monarchy, ensuring the struggle between past and present would never fade. Yet, as the dust settled, one question remained. What would Charlotte do next? And what storm might her courage unleash in years to come? And so, what began as a single moment at dinner became a symbol for a battle still unfolding, a battle for the crown's soul. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.